Well, Lindsey Graham is now afraid of himself, a quisling afraid of his shadow. And Lindsey Graham proved that tonight by going on Fox to lie about what he said on the Fox propaganda channel on Sunday. Lindsey Graham is now afraid of his own words, afraid to repeat them, so he lied about them tonight. Lindsey Graham did not dare to repeat what he said, didn't dare to repeat it tonight after 2 days of relentless criticism of Lindsey Graham, including on this program last night, and culminating at the end of the day today with Joe Biden, of all people, attacking Lindsey Graham for saying that if Donald Trump is indicted, there will be rioting in the streets. And I say Joe Biden, of all people, because the very last thing Joe Biden wants to do is attack a United States senator. In Joe Biden's Senate, and in the Senate where I worked in the 1990s, that just was not done. But no one in the United States Senate in those days reached the peak of indecency that Lindsey Graham reached Sunday night when he said there will be rioting in the streets. Not even Strom Thurmond. Lindsey Graham is a United States Senator because Strom Thurmond could not live forever, even though he tried. South Carolina's very senior Senator Strom Thurmond chose not to run for re-election to the Senate when he was 100 years old, thereby creating the opening for Congressman Lindsey Graham to move up in 2002 in that election. The next year, Strom Thurmond died at age 101. 6 months later, we discovered that Strom Thurmond had a secret, a big one. Strom Thurmond had a daughter who he never publicly acknowledged. She was born before Strom Thurmond was married. He was 23 years old, and the teenage girl he got pregnant, who was working in his parents' home, was 16 years old. Strom Thurmond's first child, Essie Mae Washington Williams, who died in 2013, was black. Strom Thurmond, always knowing that he had a black daughter, built his political career on racism and segregation. And South Carolina's white voters rewarded him for his racist, segregationist policies and for the filibusters against civil rights legislation that he joined on the Senate floor. Like Lindsey Graham, Strom Thurmond never apologized for anything. But even Strom Thurmond never said, if the leader of my party is indicted, there will be rioting in the streets. No senator has ever said that. When a special prosecutor was investigating Republican President Richard Nixon, Republican Senator Strom Thurmond did not say, if Nixon is charged with crimes or impeached, there will be rioting in the streets. Even Strom Thurmond knew a United States senator should never say that. Never. What explains Lindsey Graham? His weakness and fawning over Donald Trump is something we had never seen in a senator before Donald Trump invaded and conquered the Republican Party. Whatever explains Lindsey Graham, we may never know. Perhaps we'll learn more about him 6 months after his death, as we did with Strom Thurmond. Maybe in that peculiar South Carolina Republican Senate tradition, Lindsey Graham has a secret. And the person Lindsey Graham knows who loves secrets the most is Donald Trump. We now know that Donald Trump has been happily riding around in golf carts in Florida, knowing that in the basement he had a government document identified in the FBI inventory of the FBI search as Info Ray, President of France. Donald Trump showed Lindsey Graham what he is capable of in the 2016 presidential campaign, when Lindsey Graham was still campaigning against Donald Trump and accurately criticizing Donald Trump. And then this happened.
He gave me his number, and I found the card. I wrote the number down. I don't know if it's the right number. Let's try it. 202-228-0292. I don't know. Maybe it's, it's 3-4 years ago, so maybe it's an old number. 202-228-0292. So, I don't know. Give it a shot.
It was Lindsey Graham's phone number. Donald Trump gave out Lindsey Graham's private cell phone number on TV. Imagine the fear Lindsey Graham has lived with since then, the fear of Donald Trump, the fear of what Donald Trump could reveal about him. And Lindsey Graham knows that Donald Trump is a pathological liar. So Lindsey Graham knows Donald Trump could say something about him that is false, or say something about Lindsey Graham that Donald Trump couldn't prove. That conscience question, what are you going to tell your children and grandchildren you did to stop Donald Trump, does not apply to Lindsey Graham. Unlike Strom Thurmond, Lindsey Graham does not have children and is not suspected of having children that we don't know about. Never been married, doesn't even have a dog. He has, by outward appearance, no one and nothing to love more than the title senator. And that probably explains Lindsey Graham as well as anything can. He will do anything and say anything to hold on to the title of senator, a title he knows Donald Trump could rip away from him by endorsing another Republican to run against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. If that is the explanation of Lindsey Graham, think of the hollowness of that man. Think of the emptiness where conscience is supposed to reside in him. The two most miserable politicians in America tonight are Lindsey Graham and the man he serves, Donald Trump. Both fighting criminal investigations of their conduct. When Lindsey Graham went on Fox tonight, he was not asked a single question about the subpoena for him to testify to a Georgia grand jury about his and Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the presidential election in Georgia. But the host did show Lindsey Graham what Joe Biden said about him today and invited Lindsey Graham to lie his way out of it.
But, Senator, he did bring you up, not specifically, but he brought up a comment you made on Sunday. Let's listen.
The idea you turn on the television and see senior senators and congressmen saying, if such and such happens, there'll be blood in the street. Where the hell are we?
Senator, he's referring to you. What is he talking about? I guess it was a comment you made Sunday when asked about whether President Trump is arrested or indicted.
Yeah, so what I said Sunday was I reject violence.
That's a lie. He never said that on Sunday. Lindsey Graham never said that Americans reject violence, and he never said I reject violence. Here's the rest of Lindsey Graham's answer tonight.
But I also reject a double standard here. So if they try to prosecute President Trump for mishandling classified information after the Clinton debacle, when she was Secretary of State, people in this country will lose faith in law enforcement.
That is another Lindsey Graham lie. That is not what Lindsey Graham said. On Sunday, Lindsey Graham did not say if Donald Trump is prosecuted, people in this country will lose faith in law enforcement. Here are the words that Lindsey Graham actually said on Fox on Sunday that he is now so afraid of, he dares not to say them again.
And I'll say this. If there's a prosecution of Donald Trump for mishandling classified information after the Clinton debacle, which you presided over and did a hell of a good job, there'll be riots in the streets.
Fox owns that video. Fox owns the video of Lindsey Graham saying there'll be riots in the streets. Fox could have showed that video to Lindsey Graham tonight. But Fox will not show that video again. That's not the way Rupert Murdoch does business. There'll be riots in the streets. That was Sunday night. Tonight, Lindsey Graham changes that to people in this country will lose faith in law enforcement. Lindsey Graham turned Republicans into the riots in the streets party this week, and now he's trying to run away from what he said. And today, Joe Biden made sure that people understand what Lindsey Graham was talking about when he was predicting or advocating riots in the streets. President Biden talked about the Trump riot that already happened on January 6th at the United States Capitol.
Cops attacked and assaulted, speared with flagpoles, sprayed with mace, stomped on, dragged, brutalized. Police lost their lives as a result of that day. Police lost their lives. One of the officers said it was worse than anything he had experienced in war in Iraq. So let me say this to my MAGA Republican friends in Congress. Don't tell me you support law enforcement if you won't condemn what happened on the 6th. Don't tell me. Can't do it. For God's sake, whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? Look, you're either on the side of a mob or the side of the police. You can't be pro-law enforcement and pro-insurrection. You can't be a party of law and order and call the people who attacked the police on January 6th patriots. You can't do it. What are we teaching our children? It's just that simple. And now it's sickening to see the new attacks on the FBI, threatening the life of law enforcement agents and their families for simply carrying out the law and doing their job. Look, I want to say this as clear as I can. There's no place in this country, no place, for endangering the lives of law enforcement. No place. None, never, period. I'm opposed to defunding the police. I'm also opposed to defunding the FBI. The idea you turn on a television and see senior senators and congressmen saying, if such and such happens, there'll be blood in the street. Where the hell are we?